Hello everyone. It's me, Arden Lee. I am back today with another video. I'm all dolled up today because I'm about to go play a show with my band. If you guys don't know already, I'm in a band called Arden and the Wolves, and I would love for you to check out our music, by the way. This is a little bit off topic, but you can find it, our latest EP, Who Can You Trust, came out earlier this year, February 2018, on pretty much any platform where you can find music. So check it out. Let me know what you think. But without getting too deeply into that, let me get to the subject of today's video, which is I want to talk about how to engage sexually without creating attachments. I put up a video a couple days ago about essentially why it's smart to be incredibly discerning with your sexuality while you're in a phase of spiritual growth, because you want to really cultivate that discernment, and anything that can sort of like set its hooks in you and get to like pull you out of your center, pull you out of your integrity, to get you to compromise what you're willing to do or feel, in order to get more of that fix, essentially. And I said in that video, I said, there have been times on this path that I've been on myself where I've sort of like made an agreement with myself where I've seen, a potential sexual partner who seemed first of all like pretty non-invested, which made it a safe sort of like realm of expression for me, a safe like place to like let off some steam or whatever. But that when I felt those hooks kind of like setting in my mind, that I reminded myself, I was like, like we said we weren't gonna do this, right? We said this was just for fun. This was just like its own container to be able to practice intimacy again, especially when there is so much of sexual intimacy that is being healed in our collective right now. And I am certainly no exception to that. I'm a big part of the Me Too movement, right? Me Too 3 and 4 and 5, infinity, right? So in particular, being able to sometimes have those safe containers can be great spots for practice. But again, we want to make sure that we're really staying true to ourselves first and foremost. And I know for me that my habit in the past has often been to sort of derail whatever path I was on and sort of create a new fantasy in my head around this person that I'm getting involved with, because I feel excited and I feel inspired and I feel like, oh, but what if this and what if that, right? And that's not always necessarily the best thing for me, because then I end up allowing my own choices to be dictated by what I feel or perceive someone else is going to approve of, or essentially creating a fantasy in my head about what's possible with a certain person, and then sort of even just like pushing the general energy of my choices in that direction or whatever. So, and sometimes this can be great. It can be like really inspiring, because there's so much amazing art that I've created out of the feelings that other people have inspired in me, or the fantasies that have come to life as a result of being in attached situations with people. So it's not always completely a bad thing, but I think while we're going through this ascension process in particular, and if you're someone who's also going through the same thing, we want to really make sure that we're sticking with our own story first and foremost, that we're the heroes of our own journeys and not a supporting character in somebody else's. And it's so easy, especially for those of us who I don't want to say like those of us who don't have a strong sense of self, like, because it's not even about that, but for those of us who can be really chameleon-like at times, and who are adaptable, and who can easily take on other people's narratives and stories and fantasies and find inspiration in that and become that. We want to stay away from that right now, because we want to really find out what our own path is, and what our own story is, and what our own journey is going forward. So even when that dopamine hit sets in and we're like, oh, this is good, but look at all like the cool art I could get out of it, or whatever, we want to make sure that we're really staying true to ourselves. So there was someone who commented on that video that I made and said, well, Arden, can you share some of your tips for how you were able to do that? Because the implication being that they're still finding ways of engaging sexually and still having feelings get involved. So I wanted to touch on that a little bit, and I guess, mostly I'm just going to be sharing from my own personal experience. There are certainly things that we can avoid to avoid getting hooked, to avoid getting hooked into people. There are certain things in the poly community that have been said already. There's a lot in the poly community that's sort of about how to engage with people in a casual manner that that still feels fun or still feels inspiring or whatever. But how do you not start to get those kind of pair bonding feelings in the way that start to sort of mess you up and whatever? And they'll say things like, try like not spending the night, try, if you want to have sex with someone and engage sexually, and but then like don't spend the night, because then you're spending more time there, you're waking up together or whatever, and especially that this distorted sense of time, like you wake up and you've been sleeping next to a person all night and it's a whole thing. But really, like, what I want to say in this video, since it is being asked from the perspective of my own personal experience, is I want to really be honest about what I did and how I cultivated that. And honestly, I'm just going to say it. It was really about mindfulness, and it was really about conscientiousness, and it was really about an awareness of the point in which I started to slip into a role or craft a story that was based around somebody else's narrative that wasn't mine, right? Now, there's so many parts of this narrative that that could have been inspiring to me, that could have been really just interesting, and it's like I'm not even like compromising my own values necessarily, by involving myself in another person's narrative. Sometimes their story, like the reason we are attracted to someone is that the stories and the energy around them is really like beautiful or romantic or sexual and dark and exciting. It's not always about I'm just gonna start putting all my needs aside and cater to this fuckboy or whatever. Sometimes we're so much smarter than the obvious stuff, right? But sometimes someone brings us this energy that feels like, ooh, I want to go play in that for a little while, and that can be fine, but we really have to remember what our goals are. So without getting into too much personal detail, at least I'll try not to, this is something that I had experience with like roughly about a year ago. And I had set an intention recently that I had realized that I had been thinking of my body as being for other people and not for myself. I had been thinking of my body as being something that was a tool to win other people's approval, or to because I understood the sort of patriarchal commodification of bodies that look like mine, that I was sort of like, hey, if I have this, I can use this as currency for approval and like safeguarding from abandonment. It's essentially, if I can use my body to please this other person, then they won't leave me. And once I had that epiphany, I was like, oh, my body's actually supposed to be for myself. My body's actually supposed to be for my own pleasure, not for anyone else's approval. And when people touch me, that's supposed to feel like a gift and not like theft. Like, it's not always supposed to feel like me letting someone touch me is me giving them a gift all the time, where the value is only going this way. Like, I'm supposed to get value out of that as well. And which you would think would be obvious, but when you have had as much patriarchal conditioning on you as I have, we do. And when your greatest fear is abandonment, and attachment anxiety and all that stuff, you start to see your body and your sexuality as being these like bargaining chips, right? Like, oh, if I give you this, then you won't leave me or whatever. And obviously that doesn't always work, and there's a whole bunch of shame all wrapped up in that and whatever. But when I realized that, essentially very shortly after that realization, there was an opportunity for me to engage in sexual intimacy with someone. And I got from the very beginning that this person was not serious about me because of the very language that they were using. The time of day that they were hitting me up, the social media platform on which they were hitting me up, and whatever. And this was someone who, who I sort of knew socially, and we had some friends in common. And essentially the energy I got out of this situation was, I was like, Arden, you can have fun with this. This person's attractive, and this person is clearly expressing desire for you. And this would be a really great arena for you to actually explore your boundaries. Like, here's someone that you really do find attractive, but you know that it's not something that's meant to be serious. You know that they're not approaching you in a serious manner. You don't really even want anything serious with this person necessarily, because you don't have that kind of a connection with them. And it just didn't look like there was that much potential for that deep of a connection. Even if the quality of the casual connection is still notable, is still worthwhile, that doesn't mean that that person is like a bad person or anything like that. It just means that this is what they had to offer at the time. And I thought that would be a really good way for me to actually go into a situation and really stay present with my discernment, with my bodily discernment, to make sure that each time that as I'm doing this, that I'm not using my body as a plea bargain, to get more emotional investment from someone, that I'm actually using it for myself to experience pleasure. So I really made an agreement with myself up front. And I was like, that's what this is. I'm going to practice being able to say no to things that I don't want, instead of just continuing to surrender my agency, which had been my MO before, which had caused, obviously a lot of problems in my relationships prior, that I, justified under the mantle of kink. I was like, oh, don't kink shame me. I'm a submissive. I'm not supposed to have personal boundaries, right? And really that was coming from a lack of discernment, that was coming from bodily dissociation, because I actually genuinely couldn't tell, because I'd experienced so much bodily trauma, that if I was in a desensitization trauma response, where, and especially like the freeze response, where it was sort of like someone might touch me and might be like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this. I don't really know how I feel about it. I'm not sure. Which led to a lot of my interactions sexually essentially becoming this very black and white binary of either like, I super like you, so therefore I'm just going to surrender all my agency to you, because I'm just going to hand it over to you because you're hot and I'm into that and I think it's worth it, or whatever. Or I'm super uncomfortable with this and I don't know how to navigate around it, and I'm not even going to let myself be like alone in a room with you, essentially, so or not, or instances in which I just completely failed to draw any boundaries whatsoever, and no joke, no surprise or whatever, that I was assaulted, obviously. So going into this container, I had already set for myself a really strong intention. That is really, really important. And I think it's important not to just set a negative intention, just to say like, I'm not going to get invested. I really think it's important to set a strong intention for what your positive intention is too. So for me, that intention was, I'm going to go into this casual sex situation that I have discerned to be relatively safe, as long as I don't get my emotions involved. And I'm going to use it to practice my personal boundaries and start discerning what I like regarding how my body is touched. And so I went into that container with that intention. And look, when the person kind of like predictably acted like a very conventional, not conventionally, but a very, most people would agree he was a very attractive person, like a very conventionally attractive person who clearly has an abundance of sex, and and doesn't need to put forth a lot of effort in order to call more of that into their life. When they started behaving predictably in that manner, I wasn't hurt and I wasn't shocked by it. I wasn't like, oh, even though I'm at your house at however late in the morning or whatever, and you're not even going to get out of bed to like walk me to my lift, like, I'm not surprised. It's fine. This is what this container was for. And so I'm not like, I was like, I kind of rolled my eyes a bit, but I was like, I'm not surprised and I'm not hurt by it, right? Because I knew what this was for and I knew how it was serving me. And, even after a couple of instances where, things had been positive for, for all I had intended them to be, essentially. And this person had been suggesting to me like, oh, maybe we should collaborate together. Maybe we should do X, Y, Z. And I noticed myself like in the car, like driving along, like listening to music and thinking like, what if we did this? What if we did that? And I started like making all this like inspiration about like, like stuff that this person and I could create together and that would be fun and whatever. And then I kind of like, I stopped myself and I was like, Arden, what are you doing? Like, this is not what you said you were going to do. And I noticed that. And I remember like following up on, hey, like are you interested in like brainstorming more about like, collaborating together or whatever with this person? And they were like, oh yeah, whatever. But of course they never actually got around to it. So what that taught me also was, I noticed when I was being pulled out of my center, because I started being like, what could I do to engage with this more, to get this person to keep their word to me or whatever. And then I was like, no, that's ridiculous. If they want to collaborate with me, they'll do it, and they're not going to need me to pull their teeth around it. And if they were just saying like, oh, hey, I want to collaborate artistically with you or whatever, just so that they could sleep with me, well, then the joke's on them, because I clearly was going to sleep with them anyway. So like, it doesn't even matter, and that was when I had that mindfulness around it, and I remembered, and I was like, no, that's not the thing I said I was going to do. And I would notice, like, whenever my mind would start to get pulled in that direction, and I'd start to fantasize more and more about like what I should be doing, or plotting, seducing, calculating, fantasizing about all these like grand scenarios, I'd just be like, Arden, go read a book. Remember what you're supposed to be doing. Remember the path that you're on. Remember your work that you have in front of you, which is way more important and also way more under your control than anything that you might create with this other person. If it's going to be in alignment, if it's going to be in flow, then it's going to happen. And if it doesn't happen, then it's not in flow. If it's, if it's like, if it shows up, then it shows up, and I'll make sure to not block myself from it either. If that's meant to happen, then sure, but I'm not going to expend that extra effort to go out of my way, right? So I think that's really what it means to understand, not to get it, that, not to let those hooks get set into you, is just to be mindful of where they do, and like where your blind spots are and what it looks like when that starts to happen. And importantly, setting a really strong intention about that container before you go into it, because that's going to make all the difference. Because once you're there, you're gonna remember what you were there for, and anything else that starts to show up or starts to happen along the way, you're gonna be able to sort of like, you're gonna see, if you keep that mindfulness and you keep that intention in the forefront of your mind, you're gonna see where something looks like something else. And again, if anything that is beyond the intention that I've set wants to show up for me, then it's going to show up anyway, and it's not going to require my moving out of my center in order to lure this person in, because I've become addicted to that fix that they're giving me, that thing that I'm craving, right? No, I remembered, I was like, no, I had a perfectly fine life before I started having sex with this person, and it'll be fine as it continues to go. And in fact, it's more likely to be not fine if I allow myself to be pulled out of my integrity. If I just like stay in my lane and mind my business, then the things that are right for me are going to show up for me. And that container did show up for me in a way that was right for me, but it was what it was. And it's also really advisable, you guys, to like keep your team of advisors close by you around things like this, and and check in with them too. I certainly had input and feedback from my coaches who I go see, or even my friends that I really rely on, that I know can, that I trust, to understand the kinds of opinions and feedback that they're going to give me on that. And I stayed grounded through it. And ultimately I was like, oh, right. I remember what I did this for, and it wasn't for any of the like crazy wild scenarios I'm dreaming up in my head right now. I remember that I'm just supposed to, this is for me. This is my practice round. This is my letting off steam and whatever. And if anything else arises out of that, I'll know. I'll know. And it's up to me to know, because it's up to me to use my discernment to know whether someone is actually being truthful with me versus versus when someone is saying something just kind of off the cuff or disingenuously that they don't intend to follow up on. That is also a discernment issue. But you're going to need that discernment with everybody anyway, not just your potential lovers, but also, also your potential coaches and spiritual teachers and friends and employers. We have to use our discernment everywhere. So that really, practicing that discernment, it comes in handy for a lot in your life beyond just the sex that you're having or deciding not to have. as the case may be. So anyway, I hope this was helpful. I hope that explained it. You know, the person who asked this question, I hope, like, let me know if that answered your question, or if there's anything else that you'd like me to pick apart or extrapolate on. And thank you guys for listening. I super appreciate you. Of course, I say this every video and I forgot it in this one, but if you don't know me already, I'm Arden Lee. I'm the creator of the Repatterning Project. Do go check out the free PDF to the repatterning modality that is linked in the description box, as well as the link to the Repatterning Parlor, the community on Facebook where we all love to hang out and support each other while we're on our path to our greatness and success. Thank you again for watching. I will see you in the next video.